The entire training ground fell silent. Every eye was fixed on a young black private kneeling before the general's wheelchair. Her commander's order was sharp and clear. Stand down, soldier. She didn't even flinch. The air on the concrete drill grounds of Fort Hadley was a thick, shimmering blanket of heat, tasting of dust and determination. Under the relentless Texas sun, rows of soldiers moved in perfect, punishing synchronicity. Their boots struck the bleached ground with a single, thunderous beat, a sound that was the very heart of this place. It was into this crucible of discipline that Private Nyla Carter, barely 3 months in, walked as if the rhythm of 1,000 marching feet didn't apply to her. She moved with the focused grace of a predator, her eyes locked on a single target, General Alan Strickland. He sat in his state-of-the-art wheelchair on the edge of the grounds, a living monument of military legend. His hair was a magnificent, leonine gray, impeccably groomed even in the oppressive heat. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. 15 years. 15 years since an IED on a dusty road in a forgotten country had stolen his legs, but not his command. Before Nyla could reach him, a wall of muscle and rank intercepted her. Sergeant Major Evans, a man whose face seemed carved from granite, planted himself in her path. His voice was a low growl that could curdle milk. "Private, what in the hell do you think you're doing? Get back in formation before I personally introduce you to every latrine on this base." Nyla didn't look at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the general. "I have a matter to discuss with General Strickland, Sergeant Major." Evans's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in her bicep. "You have nothing to discuss with him. You are out of line. Now move." She didn't resist, but she didn't yield either. It was at that moment General Strickland's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as shattered ice. "Evans, let her go." The sergeant major flinched as if struck, instantly releasing her arm. The entire training ground seemed to hold its breath. Nyla walked the final few yards and, without a word, knelt on the hot concrete before the general. Her hands, steady and sure, went to the complex latticework of carbon fiber and steel that was his leg brace. "Private Carter, step aside." Strickland's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I don't need help." "With all due respect, sir, this isn't help," Nyla said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. She began making minute adjustments to the tension straps. "This is an assessment." She looked up, her eyes, like chips of obsidian, meeting his. "I reviewed your medical files. The scans from Walter Reed, the surgical reports, the nerve conductivity tests." A dangerous stillness settled over the general. "You had no clearance for that." "I had need, sir," she replied simply. "Your files show minimal but measurable residual nerve impulses in the L4 and L5 vertebrae. The motor neuron pathways are dormant, not dead. They're sleeping, sir, not buried." Strickland's jaw tightened. The men and women in the nearby formations were no longer pretending to drill. They were openly staring, transfixed by this unprecedented breach of protocol. "I've been examined by the world's best neurosurgeons. They all reached the same conclusion. Sometimes the best get tired of trying," Nyla said, her fingers expertly tracing a line of scarred tissue along his calf. "I'm not." She paused, then delivered the line that would change everything. "Sir, I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be looked through, to have people decide what you're capable of before you've even had a chance to try. They put you in this chair and turned you into a symbol. A hero, yes, but a static one. Your body isn't finished fighting, General. It's just waiting for permission to re-enlist." For the first time in 15 years, a flicker of something other than iron control crossed General Strickland's face. It was a tremor of shock, of a long-buried memory. He saw not a presumptuous private, but a reflection of his own caged spirit. He studied her for a long, silent minute. Every instinct screamed at him to shut this down, to preserve the fortress of dignity he had so carefully constructed around his disability. But her words had found a crack in the wall. 30 days, he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried across the silent field like a gunshot. You have 30 days. After that, I don't want to see or hear from you again." He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. For Nyla Carter, it was a declaration of war against the impossible. The rehabilitation wing of the Fort Hadley Medical Center was more of a museum than a clinic. It was a place of ghosts, with a faint, lingering scent of antiseptic and old leather hung in the air. Sunlight struggled through grimy, wire-meshed windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in long, slanted shafts. The parallel bars, the weight machines, the hydrotherapy pool, all stood silent, draped in a thin shroud of neglect. This wing had been unofficially decommissioned the day General Strickland accepted that his war on walking was over. The next morning, at 0545, the silence was broken by the quiet hum of an electric wheelchair. General Strickland entered the gym alone. He had expected to be the first one there, to sit in the quiet and wrestle with the monumental foolishness of his decision. He was wrong. Private Nyla Carter was already there, her sleeves rolled up to reveal toned, capable forearms. The parallel bars gleamed, wiped clean of their years of dust. A set of specialized tension cords and biometric sensors were laid out neatly on a sterile blue cloth. The air smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner. She hadn't just shown up, she had prepared a battlefield. She didn't salute. She simply nodded as he rolled to a stop. "Braces are warmed and ready, sir. The sensors will monitor muscle fiber activation and nerve response. Our only objective today is 30 seconds of supported weight bearing. Nothing more." Strickland said nothing, his face an impassive mask. He maneuvered his chair between the parallel bars and locked the wheels. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. Nyla worked with a clinical, detached efficiency, strapping the advanced braces to his legs. Her hands were firm, her movements precise. There was no coddling, no gentle encouragement. She was an engineer, and he was the most complex machine she had ever tried to restart. "Tell me if you feel anything beyond the expected discomfort," she said, her voice even. "It all feels wrong, private," he bit out, the words laced with gravel. But he let her proceed. She positioned herself at his side, one arm securely around his back, her shoulder braced against his. She was an anchor, a living support pillar. "On my mark, you will grip the bars and push up with your arms. I will guide the ascent. Ready? 3, 2, 1, mark." He pushed. The muscles in his arms, still powerful from years of propelling his own weight, screamed in protest. Pain, sharp and electric, shot up his spine. A guttural groan escaped his lips. Nyla didn't speak. She simply held him, her body absorbing the tremors, her presence an unyielding support. He was up. His feet were flat on the floor, his legs locked straight by the braces, his entire body a quivering monument to agony and effort. Now, Nyla's voice was a low murmur in his ear. "Bear the weight. Just exist." Seconds stretched into eternities. 10 seconds. His vision swam. 20 seconds. Sweat poured down his temples, stinging his eyes. He could feel the phantom itch of muscles that hadn't properly fired in over a decade. He was a skyscraper swaying in an earthquake, every rivet and beam groaning under the strain. She didn't count aloud. She just breathed with him, a steady, rhythmic presence that kept him tethered to the moment. At the 30-second mark, she leaned in. "Permission to sit, sir." He didn't so much sit as collapse back into the chair. He was gasping, his uniform soaked through, his body trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't the sweat of exertion. It was the sweat of confronting a ghost. Nyla knelt before him, already beginning to unstrap the braces. She looked him directly in the eye. "You did it." He stared down at his motionless legs with disgust. "I didn't move an inch. You stood." She countered, her voice soft but firm. "You bore your own weight. The chain of command has been re-established, General. Your body just heard its first order in 15 years, and it remembered how to obey." The days that followed blurred into a grueling routine, a monotonous cycle of dawn-lit pain and microscopic victories. The dusty rehabilitation wing became their sanctuary and their torture chamber. Some mornings were worse than others. There were days when phantom pains, like ghosts of old shrapnel, flared so intensely that Strickland's knuckles turned white on the arms of his chair before they even began. There were nights he didn't sleep, haunted by the fear of a fall, not a physical one, but a fall from the precipice of this new, terrifying hope. He cursed. He swore under his breath, his frustrations a toxic cloud in the quiet gym. Nyla never reacted. She would simply stand by, hand him a towel, and say, "Again, sir." Her implacable calm was more infuriating and more motivating than any pep talk could ever be. Slowly, agonizingly, progress came. 30 seconds of standing became a minute. A minute became 2. By the end of the second week, the violent trembling in his arms had subsided to a manageable tremor. He could initiate the shift in weight himself, feeling the long dormant muscles in his core and hips engage with a deep, satisfying ache. The first major setback came on day 17. He was attempting a controlled weight shift from his left leg to his right when a violent, excruciating spasm seized his entire left quad. His leg buckled. The brace held, but the sudden torque sent him lurching sideways. If Nyla hadn't moved with the speed of a striking snake, throwing her entire body against us to pin him to the parallel bar, he would have gone down hard. The spasm subsided, leaving him breathless and draped over the bar, rage and humiliation washing over him in a cold wave. "That's it," he snarled, his voice shaking with fury. "I'm done." This was a mistake. Nyla didn't try to argue. She just held him steady, waiting for the storm to pass. "That wasn't a failure, General," she said after a long silence. That was a conversation, a very loud one. It was the first time in 15 years that muscle has contracted with enough force to do anything. "It's a sign of life, sir. A violent, painful, beautiful sign of life." Word of their secret sessions had begun to leak out. Whispers followed them in the mess hall. Some soldiers looked on with a kind of reverent curiosity. Others, including Sergeant Major Evans, watched with open skepticism. Evans cornered Nyla one afternoon outside the barracks. "You're playing with fire, Carter," he warned, his voice low. "You're giving that man false hope. When he fails, and he will fail, the crash will be worse than the first time. You'll be breaking more than his body." "With respect, Sergeant Major," Nyla replied, her gaze unwavering. "You see a man who is broken. I see a man who is under construction." The turning point arrived on day 21. As Strickland stood between the bars, Nyla, for the first time, took a full step back, removing her physical support entirely. He wobbled, his eyes wide with a flash of panic. He instinctively reached for her. "Steady, General," she said, her voice a calm command. "Find your center. Trust the steel in your spine. It's still there." He locked his eyes on hers. He breathed. He corrected. And he held. He stood, alone and unsupported, for 1 minute and 17 seconds. In the corner of the gym, a young lieutenant who had been pretending to stretch, slowly, quietly, began to clap. The change was not just in General Strickland's legs. It was in his very presence. The transformation began subtly, in the small, unguarded moments of his day. One evening, alone in his quarters, he found himself polishing his old service medals, something he hadn't done in years. He caught his reflection in the gleaming silver of a distinguished service cross. For the first time, he didn't see the man in the chair. He saw the soldier. His eyes, once clouded with a kind of weary resignation, now held a glint of steel. He straightened his back, not with effort, but with a renewed sense of self. The man in the mirror looked back, and for the first time in a long time, Strickland recognized him. This internal shift began to ripple outward. At the daily intelligence briefings, his voice, which had become clipped and purely functional, regained its former resonance. He didn't just give orders, he commanded. He challenged assumptions, his questions sharp and insightful, cutting through bureaucratic fluff. The other officers in the room sat up straighter. They stopped seeing the disability and started, once again, seeing the strategist. The legend was reawakening. The true breakthrough in the gym happened on the morning of the 4th week. Nyla walked in at the usual time to find the braces already on. General Strickland was not in his chair. He was standing at the edge of the parallel bars, leaning on them slightly, waiting. A faint, challenging smirk played on his lips. "You're late, Private," he said, his voice a low, rumbling baritone. Nyla stopped, a genuine, brilliant smile breaking across her face. "Sir," she replied, her tone matching his playful formality. "I've been here for 5 minutes. I was just admiring the view." That day, they stopped counting seconds. They started counting steps. Clumsy, shuffling, Herculean efforts that left him drenched in sweat and gasping for air. 2 steps the first day, for the next. By the end of the week, he took 10 consecutive assisted steps between the bars. The few gym staff and soldiers who were present no longer glanced over discreetly. They stopped what they were doing and watched, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. The whispers on the base turned into a buzzing, electric rumor. Something impossible was happening in the dusty, forgotten corner of the medical wing. General Strickland was coming back. The last day of the month dawned bright and clear. A full base assembly was called on the main parade ground, the same sun-scorched expanse of concrete where the challenge had been issued 30 days prior. The official reason was a routine award ceremony, but no one believed it. The air was thick with an unspoken anticipation, a current of energy that had the entire base on edge. General Strickland's wheelchair was positioned at the front of the formation. Sergeant Major Evans stood nearby, his face an unreadable mask of stoicism. The soldiers stood in perfect, silent rows, their eyes fixed on the man who had been their static, wheelchair-bound icon for as long as many of them had been in uniform. The base commander gave a brief speech, but no one was listening. All eyes were on Strickland. When the speech concluded, the commander turned to him. "General." Strickland nodded. He turned his chair to face Nyla, who stood at attention a few feet away. "Private Carter," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "Front and center." She marched forward, her face impassive, and halted before him. He didn't ask for her help. Instead, he looked out over the sea of faces before him, the men and women he had led from a seated position for 15 years. Then, he looked down at his own hands. He placed them firmly on the armrests of his chair. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. With a raw, guttural roar that seemed to be torn from the very depths of his soul, he pushed. His entire body shook with a monumental effort. Veins stood out on his neck and forehead. For a terrifying second, it looked as if he would fail. And then he was up. He stood, shaky, unsteady, but he was standing. A profound, absolute silence fell over the parade ground. It was the silence of 1,000 people witnessing a miracle. He let go of the chair with one hand and took a single, offered cane from Nyla. He didn't lean on her. He stood on his own. He took a step, then another. Each movement was a masterpiece of sheer, unadulterated will. He walked slowly, deliberately, to the center of the formation. He handed the cane back to Nyla, who took it without a word, her eyes shining. General Alan Strickland stood before his soldiers, ramrod straight, his body trembling but his spirit unbroken. He raised his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. The silence shattered. A roar erupted from the formation, a wave of sound so powerful it felt like it could shake the heavens. It wasn't just cheering, it was a primal, emotional release. Soldiers, hardened veterans, and raw recruits alike wept openly, unashamedly. They chanted his name, Strickland, Strickland, Strickland. It was a tribute not to a man who had overcome an injury, but to the indomitable power of the human spirit they had just seen laid bare before them. Amidst the thunderous applause, General Strickland turned his attention solely to Nyla. The roar of 1,000 soldiers faded into a distant hum. He took another steadying step toward her, his voice, though not loud, cutting through the noise with perfect clarity. "You didn't teach me how to stand, Private," he said, his gaze locked with hers. "You reminded me that I had never truly fallen." He reached into the breast pocket of his dress uniform. What he pulled out was not a standard military medal. It was a small, burnished bronze coin, a challenge coin, heavy and intricate, Civilians wouldn't recognize this one. He continued, his voice thick with emotion. It's a sapper coin. We give it to those who build, who breach obstacles, who restore what was broken. He took her hand, pressed the coin firmly into her palm, and closed her fingers around it. You didn't fix my spine, Carter, he said, his voice cracking for the first time. You rebuilt my will. Tears welled in Nyla's eyes, but she stood her ground, her posture as straight and proud as his. There was nothing to rebuild, sir, she answered, her own voice strong and clear. The will of a soldier is never broken. It was just waiting for new orders. They stood there for a moment, the 4-star general and the private first class, two soldiers from opposite ends of the military universe, bound by something far stronger than rank or regulation. They were bound by a shared belief in the impossible. As the ceremony concluded, the story of that day became legend at Fort Hadley. It was told and retold, in the barracks, in the mess halls, on long night patrols. It became a touchstone, a reminder that the fiercest battles are not fought on foreign soil, but within the fortress of the human heart. The sight of the general and the private standing side by side inspired everyone on that base to stand a little taller, to push a little harder, to believe a little more fiercely in their own capacity to overcome. They had witnessed more than a man walking again. They had witnessed a man choosing to rise. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of the human spirit to defy the odds, then please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will inspire and uplift you. We want to hear from you. In the comments below, share a time you or someone you know overcame something that seemed impossible. Let's fill this space with stories of strength and resilience. Please always comment with respect. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.